Before you try to hit the big time, hit the small time first. What that means is that if you want to be at a really high level, let's say that you want to work as an animation director at Pixar, or maybe you want to work on a Lord of the Rings live action like role over at Weta, or maybe you want to do something with the Arcane series one day, or whatever it is for your goals that are up here, it's more important for you to get momentum and to be comfortable with being a small-time success at first than it is not achieving the big time. Because what happens a lot is that people get very, very impatient. They feel like they deserve that amazing job at company XYZ. They feel like they need to study something and then they deserve the fame and the fortune, or perhaps just the lifestyle of being able to do this kind of work and live comfortably wherever they're at. But the reality is you need to work up to those things. The reality is there's really not any shortcuts as to finding that success that you want to have. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at a few different biographies of successful people, as well as a short biography of a company to go through examples of what this might look like. And then at the very end, we're going to apply that to what might make sense or what sort of takeaways we can gain from studying other people's biographies. Let's start off by studying the background of Leonardo DiCaprio. He's an actor who's reached great heights, and I think that, well, his background might be interesting. How do you get all the way up there to many awards and incredible films and performances as an actor? Well, it says this. His parents separated when he was 1 year old, and they initially agreed to live next door to each other in order to not deprive DiCaprio of his father's presence in his life, as he mostly lived with his mother. For a while, though, DiCaprio lived with his father, stepmother, and older stepbrother, Adam Ferrar, with whom he had a close connection with growing up. DiCaprio and his mother later moved around to multiple Los Angeles neighborhoods, such as Echo Park, Los Feliz, and they did that while she was working several jobs. DiCaprio has said that he hated public school and often asked his mother to take him to auditions instead to improve their financial situation. So, following his third year, he dropped out of high school. So right away, we can see that Leonardo had a fairly rough upbringing as a kid. Maybe, I don't know exactly how rough, more specifically, but just based off of that paragraph, he was moving around all the time, his parents were separated, and it goes on to say here that as he was a kid, his mother was working 2 jobs and trying to bring her son to these acting gigs and auditions to make extra money. So, it says here, in 1979, DiCaprio, at age 5, was removed from the set of the children's TV series Romper Room for being disruptive. He began appearing in several commercials at the age of 14 for Matchbox cars by Mattel, which was what he considered to be his first role. And later on for Kraft Foods, Bubble Yum, and Apple Jacks. So in 1989, he played the role of Glenn in 2 episodes of the TV shows The New Lassie. And so basically as a kid, he was taking on these small little roles. His mom was trying to bring him out of school to make extra money. She was working 2 jobs. Everyone was poor. Nobody was kind of working at this big time level. And so, I think it's worth saying at this point that Leonardo was just trying to survive. He was just taking these small gigs. He was just trying to enjoy the craft. It sounded like, growing up, he hated school. He didn't want to do anything about that. He just wanted to be acting. And his main inspiration was the work itself. And I think that's one of the reasons why he became such a great actor, because he didn't really care about school. His main focus was on trying to immerse himself into the role as an actor. And I think that sort of immersion is the first love that he had. Beyond making it big, and beyond trying to reach the stars, I think what was more important to him at first was just being able to do acting and to escape the other troubles of life for a while. I don't know specifically, I don't know Leonardo, but I think that it is something we can possibly infer from what this is saying. Okay, so moving on, he did these childhood gigs, right? Now, what happened after he dropped out of high school? He dropped out of high school to make money for his mom, and then DiCaprio remained jobless for a year and a half, even after 100 auditions. I'll say that again. He was jobless, and he went to 100 auditions and failed. Imagine, grabbing the keys for the car. You've been practicing these lines for perhaps days or weeks, obsessing about it, trying to make something work. And you go out to the theater and you do the audition and it fails. Not once, but 100 times. That's what was happening here to Leonardo as he was a teenager. So eventually he got to the point where he was disillusioned. He didn't think it was really possible. What I see Leonardo doing at this point is trying to make a straight shot from dirt poor to the big time. And he became disillusioned at all these different failures, and he initially decided to quit acting. But his father encouraged him to further explore his creative side, introducing him to underground art and art in general. Motivated by his father and the need to financially support his mother, he began acting regularly on TV by the early 1990s, starting with the role in the pilot of The Outsiders. And so The Outsiders is an American drama series, looks like a TV show of some kind, in 1990. And one episode of the soap opera Santa Barbara, in which he played the young Mason Capwell. Now, I want to pause for a second and talk about something that I see a lot of 3D artists do, and it's something like this. Hey, I want to work on the Arcane series. I want to work on a Pixar film or an ILM film or whatever inspires you, and you're not willing to take any other gig besides the genre that you like doing. I kind of feel like that was happening with Leonardo. I don't think he really enjoyed doing the Apple Jacks commercials for a while. I think he would have much rather have been doing acting in some kind of genre or capacity that he was really passionate about. But the fact that he was being stubborn about that and he wasn't allowing other things to happen meant that he was also stuck. And I think what eventually got him unstuck was that momentum and being willing to accept the side gigs, being willing to accept those other small roles to get the momentum to get him somewhere else eventually. And so that's one thing we'll learn here from his story. But he played this role in The Outsiders, and he got a break that year when he was cast in Parenthood, which is a series based on a successful comedy film of the same name. Before being cast in the role of Gary Buckman, a troubled teenager, he analyzed Joaquin Phoenix's performance in the original film. His work that year earned him 2 nominations in the 12th Youth in Film Awards, Best Young Actor in a Daytime Series for Santa Barbara, and Best Young Actor starring in the new TV series for Parenthood. DiCaprio was also a celebrity contestant on the children's game show Funhouse, on which he performed several stunts, including catching fish inside of a small pool only using his teeth. So by this point in DiCaprio's story, he has momentum. And the reason why he has momentum is because he took those shitty jobs that he didn't want to take at first. And so if you're out there trying to make something big and it's not working, what kind of smaller gigs can you take just for the momentum right now? Because what we'll find over and over again is that these small gigs, making it at the small time, ends up being the fuel you need to launch yourself to the big time eventually. And that's exactly what's happening right here. So we're already kind of getting long here on this wrangle. I want to just finish up this section here on DiCaprio. what happened in 1991 is that he got a breakthrough of a major success here. He played an uncredited role in one episode of Roseanne. That wasn't his breakthrough, but it still was a step in the right direction for him. He made his film debut later that year as the stepson of an evil landlord in the low-budget horror-to-direct video film Critters 3, a role which he described as your average, or a role which Leonardo DiCaprio was described as your average, no-depth, standard kid with blonde hair. And imagine seeing that synopsis, by the way. We want an average, no-depth, standard kid with blonde hair. And that's what DiCaprio said, yes, I want to be that role. Got to be humble, too. But DiCaprio prefers not to remember Critters 3. He describes it as potentially one of the worst films of all time. But again, he was in this mindset of survival and maintaining momentum wherever he could. So this all kept going on for a little while. And finally, the thing that actually broke him through as a main actor was in 1993 when he co-starred as the intellectually disabled brother of Johnny Depp's character in What's Eating Gilbert Grape. So, think about how much happened before he got any momentum at anything. Many, many small gigs, many failures, and I hope that next time you think about things not working out for you, I want you to remember that Leonardo DiCaprio went through about 100 auditions and failed all of them, and the only way he got to where he was by doing the equivalent of Apple Jacks commercials and applying for average, no-depth, standard kids with blonde hair roles. So, there you go. That's a little something on DiCaprio. So, enough about Leonardo. What about Peter Jackson? You know, I didn't know his background before doing this wrangle here, but I've been very curious to see how he ended up becoming the director of Lord of the Rings, which is one of the greatest film series of all time. So, what he did growing up is he started off with a Super 8 Cinecamera where he began making short films with his friends. Very down to earth. He was a kid, he had a camera, wanted to have fun making films with his friends. Much like Leonardo, he was just having fun with the medium. He was just having a good time, trying to immerse himself in that kind of thing. He had long cited that King Kong was one of his favorite films, and around the age of 9, he attempted to remake it using his own stop-motion models. Also, as a kid, Jackson made a World War II epic called The Dwarf Patrol, seen on the Bad Taste bonus disc, which featured his first special effect of poking pinholes in the film for gunshots, and a James Bond spoof named Coldfinger. So Jackson was basically just trying to immerse himself in the love of film. He was trying to learn and copy from the greats. He was trying to make his own spoof films. He was trying to just get good and have a good time while he was doing it. So when he was 16 years old, Jackson left school and began working full-time as a photo engraver for a Wellington newspaper. So let's say that you wanted to be a film director and you're 16, 17, 18, whatever. And you're thinking, okay, well, I'll just go to college maybe, and then I'll make a short film there, and then I'll be off to the races. Well, that wasn't really Peter Jackson. He basically worked at this photo engraver job for 7 full years, which is actually a pretty long time. I mean, imagine how long college or high school takes and multiply that times 2. That's how long he was working this one particular job. And so for 7 years he worked there. He lived at home with his parents, and he saved as much money as possible to spend on film equipment. After 2 years of work, Jackson bought a 16mm camera and began shooting a film that later became Bad Taste. So one thing you can say about Jackson is that he had a side job for many years while he tried to pursue his passion on the side. And so again, I want to take this back to 3D graphics and animation for a second. How many of you are willing to take a side job and then work in addition to that to become an animator or to become a 3D VFX artist or whatever it is? Because that level of dedication might be necessary for your goals. And it shows that if you do have a main job just to get you money for now, and you study and work hard on the side, that can add up over time. And that can be exactly what you need to get by and continue immersing yourself for many years into the craft. And so in Peter's case, that's exactly what happened. Now, his first feature was Bad Taste, a haphazard fashion splatter comedy, which took years to make. It included many of Jackson's friends acting and working on it for free. So he was able to, convince people to not work for a dime just for the love of acting, which is pretty amazing. Shooting was normally done on the weekends, and, he was working full time this entire time. Bad Taste is about aliens that came to Earth with the intention of turning humans into food. He had 2 acting roles, including a famous scene in which he fights himself on top of a cliff. It was finally completed thanks to the late injection of finance from the New Zealand Film Commission, after Jim Booth, the body's executive director, became convinced of Jackson's talent. Booth later left the commission to become Jackson's producer. In May 1987, Bad Taste was unveiled in the Cannes Film Festival, where rights to the film quickly sold to 12 countries. And there you go. Now you're starting to get that actual momentum as a film director. He immersed himself into the community as he worked a job to get by. He was working hard on all of his hours trying to get equipment and make this thing happen. And he was able to perfect the art of trying to hustle and trying to get people to work for free and trying to network and get people to know him and know that he's passionate and serious about what he's doing. And I think on top of that, he was immersing himself into other people's work all at the same time. So after Jackson sold the rights to 12 different countries, he then was recognized by the industry, by the community, and began working on a number of film scripts as a writer. And so he was part of a collaborative group with playwright Stephen Sinclair, writer Fran Walsh, and writer/actor Danny Mulheron. Walsh would later become his life partner. So what's really cool about Peter Jackson's story is that, again, he never really had that straight shot to Lord of the Rings. He was a writer for a little bit. He did spoof films. He eventually went on to create this thing called Heavenly Creatures, or he wrote that. And then eventually he worked on a big budget Hollywood film called The Frighteners, starring Michael J. Fox in 1996. So this was a comedy/horror film entirely in New Zealand, despite being set in North America, the film being set in North America. So it really just goes to show that that's a lot different than Lord of the Rings. And what you'll find is that just because you're working on, let's say, live action stuff right now, doesn't mean that that'll transform into a completely different genre at some point in the future. So in many people's careers, if they're taking side jobs or if they're working in different genres, it ends up being the thing that they need at the time to eventually create or to lead them to their most notable life work. So something interesting to point out. Anyway, by now he has a lot of momentum, and he eventually won the rights to Tolkien's epic in 1997 after meeting with producer Saul Zaentz. So there you go. That's how Peter Jackson got his start. Now, I also want to point out one more thing. The people that he met along the way ended up being a lot of the people he relied on in the future. And so if you're thinking about networking, that's another benefit of having these side jobs or these small-time gigs. The people that surround you will go off and do various things. As an example, the producer or the investor who invested in his film eventually became his producer down the line. And so many people you meet along the journey in these small time gigs end up being the people that'll help you out with larger gigs down the road. So just keep that in mind. That's what real networking looks like. It's not going to one cocktail party, just being charming and amazing and then hitting it big time. Usually what it is you doing a lot of hard work, taking on a bunch of small gigs wherever you can and meeting people along the way while being pleasant, kind, and respectful and professional the entire time. So there's one more example I want to give you guys. And that is with a company, because companies find themselves in the same kind of situation. This time with CD Projekt Red. You guys might know CD Projekt as the video game studio that created the Witcher series, but many of you don't realize that they did not really start off as a video game company. They actually started off as a distribution company for video games. So let's see what this says. CD Projekt was founded in May 1994 by Marcin Iwaniski and Michael Kaczynski. According to Iwaniski, although he enjoyed playing video games as a child, they were scarce in the then communist Poland. So, Marcin in high school was selling cracked copies of the Western video games at the Warsaw marketplace. And eventually he met Iwaniski, and he became his business partner at that time. So eventually, they wanted to actually have a more legitimate business. There's more potential in these legitimate businesses, I would argue. And they began importing games from US retailers and were the first importers of CD-ROM games in the country of Poland. So after Poland's transition to a primarily market-based economy in the early 90s, they founded their own company. And that's when CD Projekt became a reality. So in the second quarter of 1994 that was created, they only had $2,000, and they used a friend's flat as a rent-free office. So again, very humble beginnings. You'll find most of the people that are really big right now had these very humble beginnings. Sure, you can find maybe an offhand example of a company that had just millions of dollars to start, and then that's why they're big. But most of the time, it's situations like this. Somebody had $2,000, they were passionate about what they were doing, and they went for it. So that was the case here for CD Projekt. Now, the company was one of the first in Poland to localize games, and they were sold mostly to mom and pop shops. CD Projekt began partial localization for developers such as 7 Stars and Lyrics Longsoft in 1996, and a full-scale localization a year later. So it looks like they were going to these other video game companies and telling them, hey, we want to help you distribute these CD-ROMs in Poland. According to Iwaniski, one of their first successful localization titles was for Ace Ventura, whereas previous localizations had only sold copies in the hundreds. So they eventually had a distribution project that actually worked fairly well. That got them some momentum. And so Ace Ventura sold in the thousands, establishing the success of their localization approach. And so one thing to think about is the fact that these guys hustled big time. They were going to ma and pa shops all around their country, trying to develop one-on-one relationships with the places that CD-ROMs could be sold, as well as the video game studios, and trying to bridge that connection. And so they were just trying to hustle and be that middle guy and take a cut, which is pretty cool. Now, with CD Projekt, they eventually approached BioWare and Interplay Entertainment for the Polish localization of Baldur's Gate. This, as you can imagine, is where they started hitting some real traction. They expected the title to become popular in Poland and felt that no retailer would be able to translate the text from English to Polish. So, to increase the title's popularity in Poland, they added items to the game's packaging and hired well-known Polish actors to voice its characters. Their first attempt was successful, with 18,000 units shipped on the game's release day, which is higher than the average shipments of other games at the time. And so they were smart in recognizing that they were the people that had these relationships with the distributors. And then they took that one step further and said, hey, major video game maker BioWare, how about you rely on us because you don't have anyone else that understands Polish and is connected like we do right now. So while you're at it, we'll be your distributor and we'll also help you sell the game. That was their pitch. They got it. And that is how they made a bunch of money doing that. So how did they actually transition into making video games at the time? Well, eventually enthusiasm for the game distribution stuff faded out. And CD Projekt's founders wondered if the company should continue as a distributor or as a game developer after Dark Alliance's cancellation. With the game canceled and its code owned by CD Projekt, the company planned to use that to develop their first original game. So they were looking at the market conditions and said, hey, you know what? This distribution stuff has been pretty cool so far, but it looks like it might be nearing its end. So let's pivot before that happens. And instead of being comfortable with where they're at, they decided that it was actually better to try something completely new and risky. So that's not easy to do, by the way, as a company owner. It's not easy to say, hey, this thing that we're good at and that we're comfortable with, yeah, let's completely abandon that and do something we've never done before that's really risky and might totally fail. And that's exactly what they did. So what happened after that is it flopped. It was awful. They never made a video game before. So to make the game, they formed a video game development studio called CD Projekt Red, headed by Sebastian, in 2002. The studio made a demonstration game, which Adam Badowski called a piece of crap in retrospect. The demo was a role-playing game with a top-down perspective, kind of similar to Dark Alliance and Diablo, and used the game engine which powered Mortar. Iwaniski and Kaczynski pitched the demo to a number of publishers without any success. The Lodz office closed and the staff, except for Zelensky, moved to Warsaw headquarters. So what happened right there? Well, for many years, they tried to make a video game. They failed. I'm sure many people quit or they said, you know what, CD Projekt sucks because we were good at distribution. We had our niche figured out. We took a risk and it didn't pan out. I'm sure that was on the mind of just about everyone when that particular thing flopped and the publishers weren't taking it up. So, moving on here. Zelensky left the company and Kaczynski headed the project. Although the game's development continued, the demo was abandoned and the development team had different ideas for the game and lacked overall direction. As a result, it was returned to the drawing board in 2003. The team, unfamiliar with video game development, spent nearly 2 years organizing production. They received assistance from BioWare, and again, coming in really clutch with those old contacts in BioWare. So they said, hey guys, we're your friends because we did the distribution a while back. Maybe you can help us out. And they did. So they helped promote the game at the 2004 Electronic Entertainment Expo by offering CD Projekt space in their booth next to the Jade Empire. BioWare also licensed their Aurora game engine to the company. So BioWare really hooked them up in this particular example. They were not on a good leg, and BioWare really saved the day. The game's budget exceeded expectations. The original 15-person development team expanded to about 100 at the cost of 2 million zloty, according to Iwaniski. I'm sure I'm butchering this pronunciation, so I apologize. But the content was removed from the game for budgetary reasons, but the characters' personalities were retained. However, there was difficulty in translating the game's Polish text into English. Atari agreed to publish the game After 5 years of development, the game brought Weitzman to an international audience, and so the company adopted the English name, The Witcher, coined by Adrian Chimerez. The Witcher was released in 2007 to generally positive reviews. So, yet again, many failures, many mess-ups. The path to success is usually fairly ugly. And at first, it kind of sucks. And even if you do find success, you'll probably need to take a risk and do something completely different at some point, fail again, and try to make that work as new success. That happens not just to companies, it happens to individuals, it happens to teams. This is just part of how the world works here. And, well, what are some of the takeaways that we can gain from this? I know this is a long wrangle, but I just want to point out a few things here, okay? Number one, pretty much everyone who makes it big at anything has a long list of small and failed projects that you've probably never heard of before. So next time you envy somebody who's up there at the top or you want to be somewhere, recognize that it took a lot to get there most of the time. Number two, just because a project fails doesn't mean that you haven't moved forward. So failure in the sense of a specific project not working out doesn't mean that you haven't moved forward and gained momentum in some other way. We've seen that through the professional relationships that you can develop. We've seen that through the ability to learn from that failure and take it into the future. And most often, at some point, something will fail. And not just for a little while, but maybe for 4 to 8 years. People fail for a long time, and they just keep going at it, and eventually something breaks through. Number three, most people never have a straight shot in achieving their dreams and goals. And number four, being excellent at something was always more important to the individual than achieving those great heights. So there you go, guys. I see a lot of people who are really impatient, who, are not willing to make the hard work and sacrifices necessary to achieve large heights. And, I think in these days, it's just easy to think that we can be expedient about our goals and that it can just happen for us if we work hard enough and whatever working hard enough means to us. But the reality is you're going to have the best time by embracing the medium that you're in, by having a good time, by trying to enjoy it as much as possible. And if you embrace the medium and the enjoyment of what you're doing enough, and you just hang in there and you work hard and you stay at it, then you have a greater chance of making it. And that's something that you'll see with companies. It's something that you'll see with actors, with anyone who achieves success in their long-term goals. Appreciating the lives that others have led to success will help you in your own success. Will help us all try to understand what it means to take responsibility for our own lives, to work hard, and to manifest the things through passion and love for what we do. I hope that you've enjoyed this wrangle, and I'll catch you guys next time.